It's going to follow on from a lot of things that Carol already gave us previously, so that's really good. Okay, now I want to talk about the health disparity across generations in general, but I'm going to take the Australian Indigenous population as a specific case. And we need to think that good health is not a natural state or universal right. Rather, it's a matter of achievement, consequence, privilege, or just good luck. So we can do a lot to improve good health, or also invite bad health by doing the wrong things. The presentation has two parts. The first is to provide a biological appreciation of transgenerational equity, issues by integrating lifestyle variables, people programming with glucocorticoid involvement and postnatal health. The second part then, with heightened biological consciousness, advanced ethical responsibility aimed at reducing the prevalence of preventative intergeneration inequity. So part one on maintaining health and well-being. I'll go through these points fairly quickly because I think basically we all know these things. My apologies. I was trying to find the pointer. It's the middle one. Oh, it's the top one. Good, sorry. On maintaining the physical and social environments encountered from preconception to birth exerts powerful influences on physiological function and risk of disease in postnatal life. In other words, healthy children, healthy populations really start with healthy eggs and sperm and embryos and fetuses. General well-being is shaped by genes, upbringing, personal circumstances and choices, and social conditions under which we live. And these all together give us our identity, which equals genetics plus epigenetic factors, epigenetic environmental factors. So you can't have genes in isolation and an environment in isolation, and they work together all the time. I'll need a PhD for learning this. Prof. Okay, lifestyle diseases. I was told by Daryl to behave myself. No, I'm not really behaving myself very well. I'm sorry. Lifestyle diseases develop in the socio-biological context. Social contexts are family, community, socioeconomic hierarchies, incidents in childhood, and preconceptional prenatal development. All perfectly obvious if you think about it, but often people can forget. Common lifestyle diseases are cardiovascular, compromised immune system, cancer, gastrointestinal disturbances, hypertension or high blood pressure, diabetes and other metabolic anomalies, depression, psychosis. Diseases of adaptations are commonly advanced by non-adaptive lifestyle choices relating to diet, exercise and substance abuse. So this incorporates a lot of physiological knowledge, but again on the surface it's quite easy to comprehend. So environmental degradation and social injustice operate in concert. So if you have social injustice, it develops into the whole continuum of what I've just been speaking about. You have lower social standing, interacts with fewer opportunities, interacts with less training, decreased flexibility in decision making, insufficient control over our lives, powerlessness, stress-related physical and psychological disease, and shaping of the health and well-being continuum. They all interact. And again, it makes perfect sense, except that I don't know how many people actually don't take much notice of this. Now, culturally in Australia, we're a wealthy, privileged country, but there are some of us in this country who are deprived, for very many points of view, and now I will go into a more very depressing series of statistics to dealing with our first Australians, Australian Indigenous people who've been looking after our continent, who've been looking after and loving Australia for at least 70,000 years. Now, we have a large section of the Indigenous communities experiencing reprehensible poverty consequent to past inequities and present marginalisation and neglect. It's a transgenerational business. Because in the past, our Indigenous communities that lost connection to land, they believe they belong to land. The land doesn't belong to them, which is terribly different from the people who came after, who think land belongs to them so they can dig it up and they can do whatever they like with it. The Indigenous concept is they belong to the land. And that sort of thinking has to become much more prominent when we're thinking about climate change and environmental degradation. So, our Indigenous people, over 200 years ago, when the Europeans came, lost connection to land, connection to culture, beliefs and practices, identity, children, the stolen generation, self-esteem, institutionalisation, exclusion and genocide. Aboriginal Australia was a huge continent, over 200 states, all divided up and separated and known to each other through the song lines. So it was an incredibly large civilization, which had been going, as I mentioned, for about 70,000 years. Yet the Europeans called Australia when they came Terra Nullius. Terra Nullius means empty land. And this is how Australia was taken over, because it was empty. And why? Because the Indigenous people don't own land, so the country was empty. And you can see all the different Indigenous states, languages, culture, scientific knowledge, a lot of things. In 1944, the government gave privilege to Indigenous people to become citizens in 1944. And what the Indigenous people called these, they were called dog tags. They're just like a dog tag that they're allowed now to become Australian citizens. And here's a map of the collected language, tribal and nation groups of the Indigenous people of Australia. This is only just the beginning too. Presently, at the latest census, 90% of Indigenous people identified as Aboriginal, 6% as Torres Strait Islander, and 4% as both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Know that is the battery going? You can take it back one slide, please. My apologies, it's never happened in my life before. So disorganised. Okay, it's both emotional intelligence and IQ, because I mean all these statistics they really wound people, and they need to be talked about. Okay. Proportion or percentage of Indigenous Australians compared to non-Indigenous Australians reporting diabetes as a long-term health condition in recent times, and you can see the graph. Overwhelmingly more in the Indigenous population. Drug and alcohol abuse among Aboriginals have severe social problems, where 37% drink at levels of high risk, compared with 27% of the general population. Of course, if you're marginalised, unhappy, underprivileged, suffering injustice, often one of the solutions is to go to drugs. School retention rate is 25 to 50% less than other youth. Life expectancy of Aboriginals is 15 to 20 years below that of the general population. Look, and here's the reference to other countries. And this really sticks out as a different, shameful sort of statistic. Indigenous people are 3 times more likely than non-Indigenous people to be unemployed or employed in casual, low-income capacity. 25% of Indigenous Australians live in remote areas of the country compared to 2% of non-Indigenous population. Deaths from external causes such as accidents, suicide, homicide and assault account for 1 in every 6 registered Indigenous deaths. Indigenous people constitute 3% of the Australian population but account for 20% of the prison population. Again, it's lifestyle factors interacting with the biology. Suicide is 2 to 3 times more common among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and 4 to 6 times more prevalent among Indigenous youth compared to non-Indigenous youths. And here you have a graph showing the proportion of Indigenous compared to non-Indigenous population experience psychological and physical stresses, which obviously number 13 would sort of bear out. The government spends 74 cents per capita in Indigenous Australians for every $1 spent in the rest of the population. Now, there's been a lot of change and redressing of the original injustice, but again, if you look at statistics like this, you'd say, why? Shouldn't it be the other way around to actually help it more along? 1% of the national health budget goes to Aboriginal health, but 2.4% of the population. So these previous statistics, the horrific statistics, highlight the scandalous reality that in one of the most economically successful nations on earth, the benefits are not shared fairly among all Australians. Australia has sectors of its citizenry experiencing levels of disadvantage akin to the poorest nations on earth. And I don't know how much that is broadcast outside Australia itself. If we are to address the combination of risks attributable to persistent developmental problems and socio-economic disadvantage, experiences from preconception to birth through to adulthood have to be taken into account. It's very important because it's all transgenerational. Even though we're doing as much as it's possible to rectify the injustice, it's still implanted in the genetics of the subsequent citizens who, again, perpetuate the disadvantage. Okay, so we inherit more than just our genes from our ancestors. And harmful epigenetic or environmental variables may disrupt normal development in the embryo and the fetus by disrupting DNA, forming deleterious mutations. That's a mutation which goes through the generations, or changing gene imprinting processes and their consequent expression, so that the DNA doesn't get changed. It's not a mutation, but the expression changes. And activate fetal programming strategies that trigger changed endocrine indices that modulate normal growth, development, and personal fitness. So that these programming strategies are, if a fetus is deprived in the uterus, or even during spermatogenesis and oogenesis, there are programming strategies that are go into place to actually ameliorate that stress. But of course the environment changes after birth, and then there are various anomalies which may actually be expressed in the offspring. So any of these above challenges the future identity of the conceptors, neonate, infant and adult, and impacts upon the health of future generations and future societies. So that now with genetics and physiology, why some anomalies carry through so many generations is being understood, so we can actually work from many points of view, social, scientific, legal points of views. So as a consequence, the human condition is to a large extent the product of past situations and parental attitude regarding reproductive health as created by circumstance and choice. So developmental programming or the fetal origin hypothesis. Programming is ascribed to any situation where stimulus or insult during development establishes a permanent physiological response. Now we go back to my really early slide showing you our lifestyle factors. And here is a fairly good explanation of why a lifestyle factor can cause really very heavy transgenerational effects. So we can say life in the womb will be written on the tomb. So, preconception or prenatal exposure to legal or illegal chemicals has been clearly implicated in the fetal and postnatal anomalies. We all know this. But the more deprived people are, particularly if they also have indigenous deprivations, they would actually try and help themselves by going into the drugs. Taking illegal drugs, such as alcohol or whatever, reduce fertility, early miscarriage, fetal death, malformations, retarded growth or syndrome, organ dysfunction, neonatal mortality, small intrauterine growth infants which suffer increased risk of diseases of adaptation in adult life, since neuropathies such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, schizophrenia and depression. Now these things can happen for parents, either parents, male or female, is taking drugs. So early intervention is crucial since postnatal catch-up growth in utero retards infants in some possible situations. So the summary overhead would be lifestyle status, environmental, social environment, individual predisposition and genetic predispositions, go through psychophysiological mechanisms which can either cause across the generations good health or disease going across the generations. So to some extent we can sort of ameliorate or even maximise the positive things if we understand development. So, second part are the bioethical challenges. Ecogenetics reinforces the urgent need to upgrade social, economic and political responsibilities. With knowledge, we have responsibilities. Drug abuse among Indigenous, non-Indigenous Australians is very, very high, and that of course causes the changes in the physiology across the generations, as I've mentioned previously. Even in Western Australia, petrol sniffing is unfortunate to be practiced by a lot of Indigenous people who live out back and who may be unemployed or maybe, sort of depressed for certain reasons. And petrol sniffing, here you can see the stations which are being boarded down so that people can't go and get some petrol. But it's not all discrimination. Again, it's because of the long term it takes for justice to go through the whole generations. Even I wanted just a couple of slides about people were always concerned, especially the students and the academics. We have the Freedom Rides of 1965, which was against racial inequality. The Freedom Rides of, the brave 60s. They went out in large numbers out west and talked about these issues. There was segregation. It wasn't legal segregation, but the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people were largely separate. A lot of Australians did not even know what was going on with Indigenous populations, so student actions for Aborigines. Charles Perkins and the students from the University of Sydney, my old alma mater, it was just such an active time, but unfortunately the statistics are not very much different from the ones that were taken before. Indigenous people, as well as the rest of us, we are working as hard as we can to try and educate and change the system. Australia's Indigenous people have used art to reaffirm their autonomous concerns. They are great artists because they had language. Their cultures was passed on verbally, not through writing. So here we have a drawing of needles. Here we have somebody sniffing petrol and what can happen. So bridging the socio-economic divide in contemporary Australia, it has to be bridged. We all have to work really hard. It's probably the most pertinent ethical question in Australia. And we're working towards it. It just has to happen. Every child has the right to express its full genetic potential. Every child that's born has got the right to express its genes without being ameliorated through environmental factors. We know that sickness-driven medicine is costly and will not improve overall health standards. Aboriginal health is not blood, race, genes, but loss of aboriginality, where long-term change rather than short-term fixes are required. The mental aboriginality is different, the way they look on land, the way they organise their societies, the way they lived for 70,000 or more years. All Australians need to reshape ideas within the context of health and ill health. Health and well-being is the whole of life view and includes the cyclical concept of life, death and renewal. And these sort of issues, I think, bioscience ethics, the ethics which incorporates biological scientific understanding is very important. So we can have the bioscience, bioethics continue through biological rights and political rights, whichever, or socioeconomics and health. Wherever the discipline, there is a way of actually coming across and communicating across fields, across ideas, across nations and globally. So basic initiatives and ecological-based model of preventative care. A lot has been happening, but it's slow, unfortunately, but a lot has been happening. Respecting the biological rights of humans to express their full genetic potential free from preventable harm is fundamental to the mature society. If we want to be a mature society, we must cut out preventable harm. Of course, there's a lot of harm which cannot be prevented. Maybe in future climate change, which could have been prevented if we changed our behaviour a little bit. Translating preventative care into action requires an educational framework which demands the acceptance of an ethical obligation to the present and subsequent generations. There's no point not thinking of future generations while you're thinking of the inequities in present generations. Addressing the health and living standards of Indigenous people and the underlying causes of severe and continuing disadvantage. And Indigenous people must take the central part in designing and implementing the solutions. Indigenous spiritual and social values form a solid basis of tackling social problems. They have to be involved. We all work together. It's not the newcomers deciding what's best for the Indigenous people and then impose it upon them. We must all work together. And reconciliation can only occur if all voices are heard, acknowledged and valued. So nature's fundamental design principle, we can just follow nature's principles, which is based on cooperation, biological feedback, adaptation to changing conditions and ecological diversity. These are the basic. In nature, if a species, a bacterium, a plant, an animal, a human, is to survive, it has to incorporate these factors. So it's there, it's in our genes, so that all we have to do is express it a bit more. Nature's evolutionary principle is also fundamental to the universal principle of ethics, the golden rule, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Species can't survive unless they work that way in commensalisms, and we are a species. The golden rule adaptively bridges the gap between knowledge and action. So, a lot is happening. Government and Indigenous communities in equal partnership. The Circle Court sentencing for Aboriginal punishment, have you heard about that? That's been changed so that in the Circle Court you have Indigenous representatives and the legal representatives. And it's designed for serious repeat offenders and it was introduced in New South Wales in the 2002. It's been extremely successful because the court aims to involve the whole community in a sentence plan addressing the underlying causes for the offence in order to begin the rehabilitation process. So you have special underlying causes, as I've been discussing before, and these need to be brought up in the court as well. And here's a circle court. The facts of the case are presented by the Crown in the beginning and then followed by the defence. The whole circle is opened up for comprehensive discussion, open discussion, like a round table discussion. The offender must also address the circle, perhaps after a statement by the victim is made. So if the offender and the victim meet each other, it's a much easier way to resolve the difficulties. And circle decides the sentence, type of assistance for the victim and offender, and the ways of addressing the underlying issues and problems. So this has been a very successful way of working with the legal profession. So here, within the circle's context, it is understood that to break the law, you break the law of the traditional owners as well as the Australian court. Now that has been a good idea, and it's been working very well and is spreading to all the other states in Australia. So, healthy country, healthy people, gaining from Aboriginal adaptability and creativity. As I said, there is a lot that we can learn from the Indigenous people. They have understood the environment for a very long time. Prehistory teaches us that these first Australians were some of the earliest representatives of Homo sapiens who, through millennia, sustained fitness by adaptively evolving a holistic framework of country, community and appropriate conduct. So country is extremely important. They understood it. Aboriginal culture, through sustainable management practices over many thousands of years, supported thriving populations in some of the harshest areas of the world's driest inhabited continent. We, as all of us, have got a lot to learn from them. During the dream time or creation of the spiritual ancestors or first people brought with them laws to live by, ceremony, kinship and ecological knowledge. They had all this, but they did not write it, they spoke it. It's a sung language. And here are some of the paintings, the rock paintings, they've all got some important messages. One of the bigger messages is too that the human is shown in relation to other species in its own context, and it's smaller than the kangaroos and the other species, so it's drawn smaller. If Europeans drew something like this, they may have the human really huge and small animals around. That again shows the differences in the attitude. The spiritual ancestors taught Aboriginal people how to live in the land and look after country. There is just a very brief comment which encapsulates this. If you respect the land, then you will feel the land. Your experience will be one that you cannot get anywhere else in the world. We must all relearn to live in harmony with nature rather than on the basis of conquest and exploitation. Something that's very, very important. So, integral ecology, from talking about sperm and eggs and embryos and fetuses and children and grown-ups and generations, but it's all part of integral ecology, not just one species but all of us. Reaching across generations, across species is an excellent biological survival strategy. If we reach across to the environment, if we look after the country, we will survive. If we don't, I don't know. We will not be a successful species, but we will also take all other species with us that have evolved with us, and that's the big tragedy. So thank you very much for listening, and apologise for the noisy beginning.
The floor is now open for your questions, clarifications, if there are any. Yes.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. One query is related to which there are Aboriginal people. Why these people of Australia are so miserable conditions? What are the basic causes and how our bioethical conference or bioethical function can help these aboriginal people to uplift.
Well, why is because of the... Is this working now? Yeah. Because of the conditions, the changed conditions. If you, it's not so long ago, not so many generations ago, that the Europeans came to Australia and took the land. And this was the beginning of the problem. And all the other factors that I mentioned in the first part of the talk. The Australians were, the Indigenous Australians were just pushed aside, or they had to become white to do well. In other words, get land, get money, you know. You understand that as well as I do. This is why, and if it hasn't been so long ago, not so many generations. There was all, you know, they had their own belief systems, their own knowledge in a different country, and the European knowledge was all right in parts, but also not adapted for the driest continent in the world. Now, what we can do with bioethics, I think we all must do our own thing, to do a little bit to counteract injustice.
Yes.
And this is an injustice there, just as much as an injustice perhaps, you know, in a different context. So we all can do something in however we're able to do.
I have two small questions. One is, you were telling about the Aboriginal drinking so many things and all. Do women also drink petrol? That's one thing. Second,
Now, can I answer your first question, then you ask the next one? Okay, petrol, they don't drink the petrol, they sniff it. It's a cheap high. So if you get petrol, you don't have to sniff other things or taking expensive drugs. And why they take alcohol? Because they're unhappy. Or maybe they have the addiction gene. They try alcohol and then they get addicted to the gene. So it's very much like the rest of us. Some people have got a genetic predisposition to actually love drugs, others don't. And they don't know whether how their physiology would respond until they've tried it.
the second one is that we also love pets. But at the same time, there is one group of people who are telling that pets cause some health problems also.
You mean pets,
Yeah.
like dogs and cats?
Keeping pets at home cause some health
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
What is your opinion?
Well, we've recently, in old age homes, they've said that it's very good for these people to have pets because they love something, and all human beings need to love. And if you have a dog or a cat or something, you've got something that you can love, particularly if you're old or on your own, or you know, children have left home, whatever. So that's the positive side. And also it's reaching across species, as I mentioned in the last slide. Downside, yes, there are some diseases that can be brought from the pet to the human being, or some of them, if they, you know, they may not be so very clean. So I guess you'd have to, you know, work the positive with the negative and come up to your own solution. In my opinion, having pets and looking after them is preferable than not taking any risks of catching anything from a pet and not having pets. Yes, very good. Great.
Okay, thank you, Irina, for your nice presentation on
Thank you.
social discrimination and health disparity. I'm going to ask you a question, but I like to share the views of Bangladesh. That
Oh, yes.
in Bangladesh, you know, we do not have the Aboriginal people, but we have the tribal people. They came 100 years or 150 years before from the different countries. That means they came from Arakan, Assam, or the Myanmar. and settled down in Bangladesh, and we called them the Aboriginal people. But we majority of the people are the Bangladeshi. We came from different part of the world to 500 years ago. So we are the main people of the land. The indigenous people in Bangladesh, they came 100 or 150 years before. So 3 or 4 years before, there was a political debate in Bangladesh that we do not have any Aboriginal people.
Aboriginal means original, just we have, you know, your people will be Aboriginal. It would be anyway in the Americas as well, indigenous. It just means first, before.
Yes, and you know, in Bangladesh there is a disparity. Yes, there is disparity because of the tribal people, they try to isolate it. But the government, there are many policies in the government to bring them to the mainstream.
So what's your question?
No, I don't have any question.
Oh, okay.
I just comment.
Oh, all right.
I just giving input.
Okay. Yeah, I know. But you reminded me that I didn't mention Australia now is the most mixed background nation in the world. We're the most multicultural nation in the world because of waves of immigrants, which first of all they came from Europe and European countries, and then increasingly from Asia, and now, you know, in large numbers. And it's, again, in nature, diversity gives biological strength. The more mixed we are, the more genes, the more ideas can be put into the society, and it makes us strong. So that with your indigenous people in Bangladesh, incorporate them, give them equal justice, and they will contribute and make the country stronger.
I have a question like, I know about this topic, about original people, because I work for them with center members. I don't know if you know her or not. But what I observed that those people are not ready to take the support from government. They even are not the medical treatment and something like that. They used to separate life, and they don't make us as a friend. But when we just behave with them friendly attitude, then they like it. My query is that how bioethics help in this context, for particularly for the Aboriginal people. We may use this bioethics in some way.
Well,
to improve
I would say, try and help in any way you're capable. You can do things that other people can't. Other people can do things that you can't. It's the diversity gives us strength, and it needs a consensus. That, I mean, Daryl mentioned in one of the slides, bioethics is love of life. Now, if you like life, you want other people to be good to you, so you can love it. You know, it's do unto others. The nature's sort of rule, first rule. Help where you can, and if you can't, you can't. But do not cause damage. That's all I can say.
So
you know.
if we want to take access for that place, we have to go through bioethics. Ethically, we have to treat them, and we have to give them a friendly attitudes or something like that.
No, an equal attitude.
Equal
However,
attitudes.
you would treat your friends. I don't know. I mean, I don't really understand a lot of these things, because sometimes, for example, when I was lecturing my students, I was asked, "Oh, what's the sex ratio?" And I said, "Sex ratio of my class? I don't know. I don't look at them as men, women, men, black, white, whatever. I just don't see it. There are people there, individuals, and we all work together as people. And I think, you know, if a lot of these boundaries are being broken down, it would be easier, and then people can cross much more easily. I mean, when you have, say, well, in the horrific apartheid era, where, you know, you couldn't go to certain areas if you had certain genes. You know, I mean that separates and then causes a lot of conflict. But if these sort of things are broken down, people will do their best. I don't know. We all got our solutions. I mean, you know, have you got your own ideas to, you know, to live your life, and then at the end of it, when you're my age, you say, "Phew, time for a holiday."
Yes. Okay, thank you.
If that makes any sense.
Hi, Professor. I think what you say about how disparity across generations, I think you basically reflect in the aspect of non-communicable diseases. There are 4 key tensions that was recognized. One was the tension between human right and corporate right in the context of the
Oh, a
authorities.
cooperation, not tension.
No, human right and corporate right.
Oh, okay. Corporate land rights.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And tension regarding where to invest along the causal chain. There's from social determinant to treatment services. And the third tension is government funding from their own country. You know, development
Yes.
assistance.
Yes.
And the fourthly is which diseases to prioritize. And that's why we have all this health disparity. Maybe you can just enlighten us about Australian perspective on this 4 tension area.
Well,
That's
that'd be a hard one. No, it's okay. Well, okay, let's have one at a time.
Yeah, the tension between human right and corporate right.
Well, yes, there is a tension of sacred sites, which are indigenous, and they've got their special places, and mining rights, for example, corporate rights for everyone. That is very much high on the agenda. It probably would depend. We are a democracy, and we've just thrown not a very sociable Prime Minister out because he didn't fit into our society. So with a democracy, we can actually make decisions as the people. It's like the freedom fighters. They had such a lot of success. They filled up their buses with students who were against injustice, went out west where there were virtually segregation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And they had a huge success, and they were a small number compared to the population. But people, you know, come and say, yes, this is right. Now, we do have Uluru, for example, what used to be called Ayers Rock, one of the big sacred sites in Australia. Well, it's run and it belongs to the Indigenous people now. But it's open to everyone. It's Australia, so that may be one solution. If that, you know.
Okay. The second tension is where to invest in health along the causal chain, from social determinants to treatment services. Why do they go, you know, how to get rid of this addiction of smelling, sensing petrol?
Well, the thing is, it's all a matter of statistics. I mean, all people from all cultural backgrounds have got a genetic predisposition to various things, and some have a liking for drugs. I mean, that happens. I mean, it's a sort of a known thing of the human population. Now, if you don't have very much money, or if you're deprived, or drugs are not available where you are, expensive ones, you get what's cheap. You may, you know, you could eat some grass, or you smell petrol, or do anything that gives you a high and forgetting your pain. Basically, I think taking drugs initially may be one way of helping yourself, medicating yourself, and then you get addicted and you need medication. It's a vicious circle. The thing is that there is more poverty, more isolation in Indigenous populations, so there is a high incidence of taking drugs. How to get rid of it is to, you know, help the population to integrate completely. But, drugs will never be completely out of our population because it's part of our genes for some people.
So is there any tension within government funding program for this?
There's a lot of rehabilitation, and it doesn't matter what ethnic group you are. But there are more Indigenous people being rehabilitated because there are more of them that fall victim to these sort of situations.
So I can sum up that the government has prioritized them to...
Well, I wouldn't say prioritising, trying to give enough facilities to cope with everybody. There's a big push to get it into education, into the schools, to discuss these things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll proceed to the next presenter.
For our next